Rain poured over the city like a sheet of silver glass, blurring the edges of alleyways and neon lights. In the heart of the storm, the streets whispered the name of a man who ruled the night. They called him the Raven. His empire was not built on kindness or mercy. It was built on fear, precision, and the quiet obedience of those who knew they could not defy him. Few dared to look him in the eye. Fewer still dared to speak his real name. On this particular night, he walked alone. His black coat hugged his frame, wet from the rain, and the collar of his shirt was stiff as if it too had learned to stand against the cold winds of the city. He moved through the streets like a shadow, silent, commanding, unbroken. People scattered when he passed, and the occasional criminal thought twice before meeting his gaze. The Raven was a man of myth, a name that carried weight heavier than gold or weapons. He entered a small cafe on the edge of his territory. The place was warm and dimly lit, the smell of roasted coffee and sweet pastries cutting through the chill outside. It was unremarkable, humble, almost ordinary, but that was exactly why he came. Even the strongest need moments of ordinary life, though very few would admit it. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved with quiet grace. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her eyes were calm, steady, as if they held secrets the world was not meant to know. Her name was Leora, and she had a way of noticing everything. Most people saw only the surface, cups, trays, spilled sugar, but Leora saw more. She saw the tension in shoulders, the hesitation in hands, the tiny cracks that told of hidden pain. When she spotted him, she did not flinch. Most would have, or at least glanced nervously at the door. But Leora met his gaze steadily and offered a small, polite smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft but confident. "The usual?" He nodded, his expression unreadable. He was not used to being met without fear. Even allies who owed him loyalty rarely dared to look him in the eye. Yet here she was, calm as if he were just another customer, nothing more. As she poured the coffee, her hand brushed his. It was a simple, accidental touch, but for him, it sent a strange ripple through his chest. He pulled back slightly, unnerved, though he did not understand why. "Do you always speak to strangers so easily?" he asked, his voice low and measured, carrying a subtle edge that demanded honesty. "I speak to everyone as they deserve," she replied simply, never meeting the fear or caution in his tone with anything other than her quiet certainty. There was something about her, something in the way she moved, the way she spoke, that unsettled him. The city had taught him to expect treachery, lies, and manipulation. People had names they did not own, faces they hid behind. But she seemed unafraid, unhidden, and unnervingly truthful. For a long moment they were silent, the cafe noise fading into the background. Rain tapped against the windows, and the steam from the coffee rose in the dim light like the ghosts of forgotten promises. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "I know who you are," she said. Time seemed to stop. He froze. His hand tightened around the coffee cup, knuckles whitening as if holding onto it might anchor him to reality. His mind raced, memories long buried surfacing in the blink of an eye. The streets of his youth, mistakes he had tried to erase, and a name he had prayed no one would ever speak aloud. "You—" His voice caught. For a man who had commanded entire districts, faced enemies armed with steel and fire, he could not find words. She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and her eyes glimmered with something dangerous and tender all at once. "Your real name," she said softly. "I know it, and I will not forget it." He felt the weight of every moment he had tried to bury. The persona of the Raven was a mask, built of fear and shadows. Behind it, the boy he had once been, the man he had been forced to become, stirred uneasily. It was a name he had abandoned to survive, a name no one in the world should ever speak. But here, in this small cafe, it hung between them like a blade suspended by a thread. "Why? Do you know this?" he asked finally, his voice low, almost strangled. He had faced threats that would have broken others, yet her calm certainty made him feel exposed in a way he had not felt in decades. "Because someone must," she replied. "Someone must remember the truth when everyone else fears it." Her gaze never wavered. "And because the city, it will not save you. Only you can." Her words struck him with the force of a storm. He was used to controlling people, manipulating outcomes, bending events to his will. But here, she had control in a way that did not come from fear or loyalty. It came from knowledge, from understanding, from seeing him. Not the raven, but the man he had tried to hide. He took a sip of his coffee, but it was bitter in his mouth. It did not taste like warmth or comfort. It tasted like memory, like danger, like a warning he could not ignore. "Stay away from me," he said, trying to sound commanding, but the words felt hollow. Fearless, he had faced gunfire and betrayal. Yet the presence of this quiet woman unsettled him more than any rival ever had. "I cannot," she said simply. "Not when you are still trapped in shadows of your own making." The storm outside had eased, leaving only a gentle drizzle. Streetlights flickered through the wet glass of the cafe windows, painting the room in soft streaks of gold and gray. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. It was just him, her, and the weight of the words she had spoken. He wanted to leave. He should leave. But some invisible thread held him in place, weaving around his chest and pulling at his mind. He wanted answers he had not known he needed, and a part of him feared that seeking them might undo everything he had built. "You don't know what you're asking," he said finally, voice tight. "You have no idea what I've done, what I've become." "Then show me," she said, her voice unwavering. "Show me who you truly are. Or don't. But know this. You cannot hide forever. Not from yourself, not from me." Her words lingered in the air like a spell. He did not respond. He could not. His eyes, usually sharp and merciless, now reflected something raw and unguarded. Vulnerability he had buried beneath years of control stirred, and he felt it clawing at him, demanding recognition. A sudden noise from the back of the cafe, a chair scraping, a cup clinking, brought him back to reality. He forced himself to stand, towering over the small counter, black coat dripping with rain. The city awaited him with all its danger, its expectations, and its blood-stained rules. Yet he could not leave, not yet. "Leave," he said again, this time quieter. Almost a plea. "Leave before you regret it." She shook her head, calm as ever. "Regret is a luxury, and some truths, they demand to be faced." He stepped toward the door, and she followed with a quiet grace. He paused, hand on the handle, and turned back. Their eyes met. In hers he saw no fear, no greed, only understanding, and something else he had long forgotten. Hope. The rain outside had stopped. A single shaft of moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the street, and in that light, he realized the life he had built on shadows and fear was no longer enough. Someone had seen past the mask, and for the first time he did not know whether to feel anger or relief. "You should leave now," he said, voice low, but it lacked the conviction of command. "I will be seeing you again," she replied, her words soft, certain, and haunting. Then she turned and disappeared into the misty street, leaving him alone in the quiet cafe. He stared after her, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the rain. She knew his name. She knew him. And somehow he could not shake the feeling that this knowledge would change everything. He returned to the darkness outside, the city alive with whispers and fear, but inside him, a new tension stirred, a fragile, dangerous thread of curiosity, longing, and perhaps redemption. He was the master of shadows, yet a single whisper had shaken the foundations of his carefully constructed world. And as the door closed behind him, he whispered, almost to himself, "Who is she?" Cliffhanger. Somewhere in the night, Leora smiled, knowing she had set the first pieces in motion. The Mafia boss, the Raven, feared no one, but he had never faced a truth that could pierce his heart. And now the game had begun. The night had swallowed the city whole. Rain no longer fell, but the streets glistened wet and empty, reflecting the dim glow of neon lights like broken mirrors. In his private office high above the streets, the Raven sat in silence. The name she had spoken haunted him still, echoing in his mind with a weight he had not felt in decades. He poured himself a drink, though the liquid trembled in the glass as his hands shook, betraying the calm facade he always wore. He had built walls around his heart, thick and unyielding, but Leora's words had slipped through the cracks. He tried to remember the mask, the persona of the Raven, but behind it the boy he had once been, stirred, fragile, and human, long forgotten. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. The door clicked open and one of his lieutenants entered, cautious as always. "Boss orders?" He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. He did not trust the sound of his own voice tonight. The lieutenant hesitated, sensing a shift, but left without another word. Alone again, he sank deeper into the chair, staring at the moonlight falling across the floor. "She knows my name," the words repeated in his mind like a curse and a promise all at once. Meanwhile, Leora walked through the quiet streets, her mind sharp, her steps deliberate. She knew she had to move carefully. The city was dangerous, and yet she had chosen this path, willingly walking into the storm. She was not naive. She had seen men like the Raven, men who commanded fear and loyalty with equal force. But she also knew the truth behind the legend. Beneath the ruthless exterior, he was a man haunted by choices made in youth, by powers he had tried to escape. Leora's family had been keepers of secrets, seers and guardians of knowledge long hidden from the world. They had warned her that the boy who became the Raven would one day return to the shadows he had made. But only someone who dared to face him could help him find redemption. That was why she had spoken his name. That was why she had come. Her path crossed his again, though neither had planned it. She entered the cafe the following evening, this time not as a server but as someone who had prepared for confrontation. She arranged the chairs carefully, making the room appear untouched and calm, though the tension in the air was undeniable. When he arrived, the city seemed to shift around him, shadows lengthening as if in acknowledgement of his presence. He stopped at the doorway, sensing her even before he saw her. Her gaze met his, steady, unyielding, and he felt the same stir of unease that had shaken him the night before. "You came again," he said, voice low, cautious. He had learned to command attention with words and action, but with her, every instinct seemed useless. "I told you," she said softly, walking toward him. Some truths demand to be faced. He studied her, noting the way she moved, the confidence in her steps. Most people would run, would tremble or hide behind lies, but she did not. There was a clarity in her presence, a sharpness that cut through the fog of his carefully constructed life. "Why?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why are you here?" "I am here because no one else will," she replied. Her voice was calm, certain. "Because you cannot save yourself, not yet. And because the city will not forgive, will not forget, the man you tried to become." Her words struck him with a force he had not expected. He had faced betrayal, gunfire, and rivals who would have killed him without hesitation. But her certainty unsettled him more than all of it combined. He felt exposed, as if a mirror had been held up to his soul, reflecting a man he had spent decades trying to bury. "Show me," she said, taking a small step closer. "Show me the truth behind the mask or leave. But know this, you are not invincible. You cannot hide from yourself." He felt the pull of her words, the gravity of her presence. She was not afraid, not of him, not of what he represented. She saw him as he was, not as the world told them he should be. For the first time in his life, he wondered if someone could see past the darkness he had cultivated. "I am not what you think," he said finally, his voice rough, breaking the silence. I am what I had to become." "And what of what you could still be?" she asked gently. "Do you ever wonder if there is a path back from the shadows?" He looked at her, and for a moment he saw the possibility he had long denied. He saw a life beyond fear, beyond control, beyond the empire built on obedience and terror, and yet he feared it. Change was dangerous. Vulnerability was dangerous. Love even more so. "You speak as if you know me," he said, tension rising in his voice. "But you know nothing of the choices I made, of the blood I have carried." "I know enough," she said quietly. "Enough to understand that you are not yet lost, and enough to help you find a way back." The air between them was thick, charged with unspoken words, memories, and longing. Every glance, every subtle movement carried weight. He was a man used to command, yet he found himself at a loss for how to act around her. He wanted to push her away, yet a part of him longed to let her see the man beneath the mask. She reached out a hand, not in demand, not in threat, but in understanding. "You are stronger than you know," she whispered. "But even the strongest cannot face the darkness alone." He stared at her, conflicted, torn between the instinct to dominate, to retreat into the fortress of his empire, and the strange, fragile hope her presence stirred. He had faced enemies armed with weapons, men who sought his life for greed or revenge, but he had never faced someone armed only with truth, with knowledge, and with courage. "You are not afraid," he said finally, almost a statement, almost a question. "Of me, of what I am." "I am not afraid of truth," she replied, "and you cannot hide from it any longer." For hours they spoke in whispers, sharing fragments of a past neither fully understood, yet both shaped by its consequences. She told him of her family, of their role as guardians of secrets, of their duty to guide lost souls. He spoke sparingly, offering glimpses of the boy he had been, the man he had tried to bury beneath layers of fear and power. It was dangerous, these moments of vulnerability. Every word could be a weapon, every glance a trap. And yet in that small cafe, among the shadows and rain-streaked windows, a fragile trust began to form. A thread, thin and uncertain, stretched between them, a thread that promised both peril and redemption. As the night deepened, a sudden noise from the alley outside startled them both. He tensed, ready for an attack, but she placed a hand on his arm, steadying him. "Not everything in the dark is an enemy," she said calmly. "Some things are here to show us the way." He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw clarity, courage, and a knowledge that unsettled him more than any threat the city could offer. She had called him by his true name. She had seen him not as the Raven, but as the man he had tried to hide, and in doing so she had opened a door he thought was sealed forever. "Why help me?" he asked, voice low, almost breaking. "Why care?" "Because even monsters deserve a chance," she replied softly. "And because someone has to remind you who you truly are." For a moment, silence fell again. The world outside faded, leaving only the two of them and the weight of truth spoken and unspoken. He realized something he had not allowed himself to feel in years, that he was no longer in control of every piece of his life. That someone had seen past the empire, the mask, the fear, and found the man beneath. And though he would not admit it, he wanted to see what lay beyond that revelation. Cliffhanger. As he turned to leave, a shadow moved across the doorway, a figure from his past, long thought gone, someone tied to the secrets he had buried. Leora's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time the calm she carried wavered. The Raven's heart thumped, not with fear of the streets or rivals, but with the knowledge that the past he tried to escape had found him, and the game of truth, power, and redemption had only just begun. The night was heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Shadows clung to every corner, twisting along the narrow alleys and abandoned rooftops. Rain had returned in soft, persistent drops, turning the streets into rivers of reflection. The Raven moved through them silently, his black coat soaked, but his mind was hotter than any fire the city could offer. Leora had warned him, though not in words meant to comfort. "The past will come for you," she had said. He had nodded at the time, brushing it off. But now, every instinct in him screamed that she was right. The shadow from the doorway of the cafe, the figure that had appeared without warning, was no ordinary visitor. The man, tall and unyielding, moved like a phantom, a reminder of debts unpaid and choices made too long ago. He slipped into the darkness, following the figure at a distance. The streets were empty, silent except for the drip of water from broken gutters. His mind raced, circling the memories he had tried to bury. He remembered the night he became the Raven, the deal he had struck in desperation, the power he had taken at the cost of pieces of himself. He had built an empire from shadows, and now those shadows were coming to life in ways he could not control. Leora appeared beside him as silently as a shadow herself. Her presence was grounding, a tether to reality, and yet it brought a new tension. "You do not have to face this alone," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath it that he could feel. "I face everything alone," he muttered, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the streets for danger. "I always have. And yet here I am," she replied simply. "Because even the strongest cannot face all their darkness alone, not without a hand to guide them, even if it is fragile." He glanced at her, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a flicker of doubt. Not of her, but of the life he had built. He had prided himself on control, on being untouchable, yet Leora's presence reminded him of something long forgotten. Trust, understanding, the fragile thread of connection that humans often ignored in pursuit of power. Ahead, the shadow stopped beneath a flickering streetlight. The man turned slowly, and the light revealed a face he had thought erased from memory. Cold, sharp, and dangerous, it mirrored the choices he had made years ago. This was someone who knew the man behind the Raven, who had witnessed the boy he had been before the mask. "You came back," the figure said, voice carrying a weight that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. "After all these years, I thought you would stay in the shadows forever." "I did what I had to," the raven replied, voice low, measured, yet tinged with tension. "I built a life. I survived." "You survived," the man said, stepping closer. "But at what cost? You took power, yes, but every choice left a mark. You cannot outrun what you have done, or what you are." Leora stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "You are not your past," she said firmly. "You are the man you choose to be now. You can face this and come back whole if you are willing to try." The raven's eyes flickered to hers, searching, questioning, yet seeing only calm determination. Her hand was small, yet the weight of it anchored him, reminding him of something he had thought impossible. That there was still a path to redemption, still a chance to reclaim himself from the darkness he had embraced. The man from his past sneered, sensing hesitation. "Redemption is a story for children. You are a predator in a city of prey. Do not forget who you are." "I am no longer who I was," he said, his voice rising with conviction, a flicker of fire burning in his eyes. "I am more than the mistakes I made, and I will not let them define me." A tense silence followed. The city seemed to hold its breath. Even the rain slowed, dripping slowly from the streetlights as if waiting for what would come next. "You have changed," the man said finally, his voice softer, but not less threatening. "But shadows do not vanish easily. They linger, and they wait." "I am ready," the raven said. The words surprised even him. He had never allowed himself to believe in such certainty. And yet, with Leora at his side, he felt something unfamiliar. Strength not born from fear, but from choice. The two of them moved together cautiously, approaching the figure. Leora's presence was a steady light in the darkness, her calm certainty reinforcing his courage. She did not flinch, did not hesitate. And that, more than anything, gave him the confidence to confront what had been hidden for so long. The figure raised a hand, shadows stretching unnaturally from it. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with a force that seemed almost alive. It was the darkness of his past, a reminder of the bargains he had made, the lives he had touched with fear and violence. "You cannot fight this alone," Leora said, her voice steady. "But you do not have to." The raven nodded, gripping the edge of his coat, his fingers curling into fists as he faced the spectral figure. For decades, he had relied on force, intimidation, and control. Tonight he would rely on something else: courage, truth, and the connection he had almost forgotten. The shadows around the figure began to writhe and twist, taking shapes that hinted at the city's secrets, the choices he had made, and the bloodlines he had crossed. It was a force born from fear, yet it trembled at the light Leora brought. Her hand remained on his arm, small but unyielding, and he felt his heart steady, his mind clear. "You do not own me," he said finally, his voice ringing through the night. "I am not your shadow, I am not your prisoner. I am my own." The figure recoiled, the darkness flickering as if uncertain. Leora's eyes met his, and he saw the trust she offered, the hope that he could rise above what had been. For the first time, he felt the stirrings of something more powerful than fear: redemption. "You can still be free," she whispered, a soft certainty threading through the tension. "But you must choose it. Not for the city, not for me, but for yourself." The raven inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of every past decision pressing on him. He had built walls around his heart, yet now they seemed brittle, breaking under the light of truth. For decades he had been untouchable, a figure of fear, but Leora had seen past the mask. She had called him by his real name, and now, standing at the crossroads of past and present, he realized something he had never allowed himself to believe: that he could be more than the darkness he had embraced. The shadow figure advanced, tendrils of darkness curling like smoke. The air was thick with tension, almost suffocating, yet the raven did not flinch. He stepped forward, hand brushing against Leora's in a silent acknowledgement. Together, they faced what had haunted him, the darkness that sought to claim him again. "You are not me," he said to the figure, voice firm, steady, carrying both command and defiance. "You do not control my fate. I choose who I am." The shadows wavered, twisted, then seemed to shudder and retreat, unable to withstand the force of his resolve, bolstered by her presence. Leora's hand squeezed his, steady, encouraging, a reminder that even the strongest could find courage in trust. As the figure faded into the night, the city exhaled, and the rain began again, soft and cleansing. The raven turned to Leora, his face reflecting a mixture of awe and relief. He had faced a part of himself he thought lost forever, and he had survived. "You have changed something," he said quietly. I do not know what to call it yet." "You can call it what you choose," she replied, a gentle smile touching her lips. "But know this, you are not alone. Not anymore." He looked at her, the woman who had called him by his real name, who had faced the shadows with him, who had reminded him that he was capable of more than fear and control. For the first time, in decades, he felt a fragile hope bloom within him, a sense that the darkness could be tempered, guided, and perhaps even healed. And yet he knew the city would not wait. Rivals, enemies, and whispers of his past would come, and the choices he had made could never be erased. But with Leora by his side, he felt the stirrings of something he had long thought impossible, that he could face the world and still remain human. Cliffhanger. As they walked back through the rain-soaked streets, a message was delivered to him. A single, folded note, sealed with a mark he had not seen in years. Unfolding it, he read the words written in a hand he thought long gone. "The darkness you escaped is only the beginning. The real storm is coming." His eyes met Leora's, and for the first time he understood that the journey toward redemption and love would be far more dangerous and far more transformative than he had ever imagined. The city slept under a veil of fog, the streets silent but for the occasional drip of water from rooftops. Yet above the quiet, tension vibrated in the air, a warning unspoken but undeniable. The raven stood at the top of his tallest building. The city sprawled beneath him like a living map of shadows, lights, and secrets. His empire, built on fear and respect, had never felt so fragile. The note he had received hours before had not left his mind. "The darkness you escaped is only the beginning. The real storm is coming." Its words pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder that past and present were converging, and that the life he had tried to claim could unravel in a single moment. Beside him, Leora stood calm, yet her presence radiated strength. The rain from earlier had ceased, leaving the air crisp and clean, but a tension lingered as if the city itself sensed the coming confrontation. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, a small anchor against the whirlwind of thoughts and fear threatening to overtake him. "You cannot face this alone," she said softly, her voice carrying the certainty that had guided him through the past nights. "But you do not have to. Not anymore." He turned to her, eyes shadowed, conflicted. "I am used to facing darkness alone. I have always survived by myself, and always alone," she countered gently. "But surviving is not the same as living. And you deserve to live, not just endure." His chest tightened. He had lived in fear, power, and control, and he had always believed that was enough. Yet standing beside her, he realized the emptiness he had ignored for years. The city had feared him, respected him, yet no fear or respect had ever touched his heart. Only her calm presence had done that. Only she had reminded him that he could choose differently. The message on the note pulsed like a drum in his mind. He knew what it meant. The shadows from his past were coming, not as memories or whispers, but as something alive, something intent on reclaiming the pieces of his soul he had lost. A sudden movement at the edge of the rooftop caught his eye. Figures emerged from the mist, shadows forming shapes both human and unnatural. The storm had arrived. They were emissaries of the deals he had made, the debts unpaid, the darkness he had tried to bury. He stepped in front of Leora, the instinct to protect rising before thought. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low and firm. "This is mine to face. No, she said, placing her hand on his chest. You do not face this alone. And I will not let you. Not now, not ever. The shadows advanced, forming a wall of intent and threat. The air grew heavy, charged with a power older than the city, older than the man standing before them. This was no longer just about fear or survival. It was about confronting every choice he had made, every pact he had entered, every piece of himself he had buried. The Raven inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of decades press on him. His mind raced through memories long forgotten, nights of cold streets, deals signed in desperation, the boy he had been before fear hardened him into stone. And then he felt her hand squeeze his, and for the first time, he realized that he did not have to be alone. He could face this darkness not as the Raven, but as the man he was underneath. Your power is not mine, he said finally, voice echoing across the rooftop. I am not your prisoner. I am my own. And you will not take me again. The shadows wavered at his words as if unsure of their strength against this new force. Courage born from connection, from choice, from love. Leora's eyes met his, calm and unwavering, and he felt a warmth that cut through the cold fear surrounding him. You are stronger than you know, she whispered. Stronger because you choose to stand, not because you were forced to. Stand with me, not against me. A sudden surge of wind blew across the rooftop, scattering the mist, and with it came a voice, deep and resonant, echoing from the shadows themselves. You cannot escape me. You chose power, and with it your soul belongs to me. The Raven's jaw tightened. He had once trembled before this voice, had obeyed it in fear and in hope of survival. But now, with Leora at his side, he felt something he had not felt in years. Clarity, defiance, and the resolve to reclaim himself. I belong to no one, he said, stepping forward. I am not defined by fear, by deals, by shadows. I am my own. And I choose the light I create, not the darkness I was given. The shadows surged, taking shapes more solid, more threatening. The power that had haunted him for decades pressed against him, testing, probing. And yet he felt Leora's hand on his, a quiet reassurance, a reminder that he was not alone. Together, they formed a barrier of strength and purpose. The wind swirled around them, the night trembling as if the city itself awaited the outcome. The Raven's past and present collided in a forceful crescendo, every choice, every fear, every regret manifesting before him, and yet he did not falter. With Leora at his side, he stood firm, facing the storm he had once fled from. You are more than your mistakes, she said, voice carrying over the roar of the wind. And tonight you reclaim yourself, not for the city, not for power, but for who you truly are. He felt the shadows hesitate, uncertainty rippling through them. For decades he had relied on fear and violence to survive. But now he realized the greatest power lay not in domination, but in the courage to face one's own truth. The shadows began to dissipate, retreating into the mist as if the force of his resolve and her presence had broken their hold. The city below was quiet once more, the danger receding, leaving a strange calm in its wake. The Raven looked at Leora, awe and relief flooding through him. You stood by me, he said, voice low, almost a whisper, even knowing what I am, even knowing the darkness I carry. I stood by you because I saw who you could be, she replied softly. Not because of fear, not because of power, but because you deserve to see yourself whole again. He let out a long breath, the tension in his body slowly unraveling. For the first time in decades he felt free, not just from the city's fear, not just from enemies, but from the shadow of himself he had carried for so long. Then, "What now?" he asked, turning to her, his eyes searching. "Do we simply return to the world we knew, or is there something more?" "Something more," she said with a smile, gentle and certain. "A life where you are not defined by darkness, where you are free to choose, and where we face the world together, not as master and servant, predator and prey, but as equals, bound by trust and understanding." He felt a warmth in his chest, a sensation almost foreign in its gentleness. Love, perhaps, or at least the promise of it, woven into the threads of trust, courage, and redemption. He realized that the power he had always sought, the empire, the fear, the control, was nothing compared to this: connection, choice, and the chance to reclaim himself. The fog began to lift. The city bathed in the first light of dawn. Rain trickled from rooftops, sparkling in the soft golden glow. The streets were quiet, the night's danger past. but the story of shadows and redemption would remain with them forever. The raven looked at Leora, and for the first time he did not see a waitress, a guide, or even a savior. He saw a companion, a partner, someone who had called him by his true name and reminded him of the man he could still become. "You changed everything," he said quietly, without even trying. "Sometimes it only takes one voice to remind a man who he really is," she replied. He reached for her hand, this time not as a gesture of command, but as an acknowledgement of equality and trust. She did not flinch, did not hesitate, and in that moment the city below, full of whispers and secrets, seemed to stand still, witnessing the first fragile steps of redemption, connection, and the promise of something new. Epilogue. Final cliffhanger. As they descended the rooftop, returning to the city that had forged him, a faint shadow lingered at the edge of their vision, a whisper of the past, a hint that danger was never fully gone. Yet the raven no longer feared it as he once had. With Leora by his side, he knew that no shadow, no darkness, no threat could touch the man he had reclaimed, and somewhere deep in the city's heartbeat, a new story began, the legend of a man who was darkness incarnate, and the woman who called him by his true name, teaching him that even in a world of shadows, love and redemption could endure.